To misquote the late, great Nina Simone, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new unit in our study of fundamentals of music. Today we're plunging ever deeper into the ocean of harmony, expanding on the ideas that we've encountered already. Things kick off with the introduction of four-note harmonies, with a look at all you need to know about building, identifying, and labeling these new chords. Armed with that information, we're going to look at how we can use chromaticism to temporarily borrow chords from other keys. And to cap things off, we'll introduce a new way to create tension in your harmonic progressions with a look at suspended chords. I'm ready if you're ready, so grab that textbook, something to take notes with, and let's get right into the good stuff. Throughout this course, we've been incrementally expanding our study of pitch and harmony, progressing from single pitches to two-note intervals, and most recently to three-note triads. We're taking another step along this path today with the introduction of four-note harmonies, which we call seventh chords. Ultimately, we're going to learn about 5 different types of seventh chords, but in today's video, we'll focus on just one type. Generally speaking, we construct seventh chords much in the same way that we constructed triads earlier, by starting from a root pitch and stacking major or minor thirds. Only this time, we'll go beyond the triad by adding a fourth note to the stack. The interval between the root and this new fourth note is always a seventh interval, which is a dissonant interval. This dissonant outer interval provides the chord with both its distinctive unresolved character as well as its name, seventh chord. We'll begin our study of seventh chords by examining the dominant seventh chord. A dominant seventh chord occurs whenever we take a major triad and add a note a minor third above the chord. This creates an outer interval of a minor seventh. To visualize this as a formula, we might write something like dominant seventh equals major triad plus minor third. When you are asked to construct a dominant seventh chord, you'll find the process to be quite similar to constructing triads. Begin by drawing the root pitch of your harmony on the staff, followed by stacking a snowman on top. Only this time you extend the stack up to a fourth note. Finally, examine the intervals between each note, adding accidentals as necessary to create the proper major or minor thirds. For this, it may be helpful to visualize our formula on a more granular level, such as dominant seventh chord equals root plus major third plus minor third plus minor third. Now that we have a basic understanding of the anatomy of the dominant seventh chord, we can examine the broader contexts in which this harmony functions. We'll begin by bringing back a special collection of triads from the previous unit, the Diatonic Triads. You'll recall that we formed these by starting from a major scale and then building triads above each scale degree using only the pitches of the key. Let's run that same operation again, but extend each diatonic harmony one note further to create a set of diatonic seventh chords. Now, when we step back to examine our new set of diatonic sevenths, it turns out that most of these are unrecognizable to us, with one exception. The harmony formed upon scale degree 5, or Sol, the dominant scale degree, is the very chord we've just been introduced to. And furthermore, it's the only instance of a dominant seventh chord within the entire set here. Now, due to its unique occurrence within the key, the dominant seventh chord functions as a sort of GPS locator for the tonic. Whenever we hear a dominant seventh chord, it tonicizes whichever pitch is a fifth below that chord. You can think sol to do. Now, we've also previously described the harmonic function of dominant chords as serving to create tension, which is usually resolved by progressing to the tonic. Before we proceed to labeling and inverting dominant seventh chords, it's worth pausing here for a moment to examine exactly how this tension manifests in the harmony. Let's examine a typical dominant to tonic progression, shown here in SATB format and in the key of B flat major. The dominant seventh chord is built upon the fifth scale degree, and it contains the pitches F natural, A natural, C natural, and E flat, although we arrange them a little differently in our example. In the voicing shown on the screen here, we have the root F natural in the bass, the fifth C natural in the tenor, the seventh E flat in the alto, and the third A natural up in the soprano. I've already pointed out the dissonant interval of a minor seventh that forms between the root and the seventh, F to E flat. But there's another dissonant interval hiding inside this harmony. Between the third and the seventh of this chord, we have a diminished fifth, or in the case of the voicing here, an augmented fourth. And it's between A natural and E flat. This unstable interval is better known to us as the tritone, and in this instance, the instability it causes intensifies the desire for this chord to resolve to a more stable tonic harmony. When we examine the voice leading that connects us from the dominant seventh back to the tonic, we once again see that leading tone to tonic, upward half-step motion that we've come to expect from a 5-1 progression. But additionally, we now observe half-step motion downward from the seventh of our dominant chord, resolving to the third of the tonic chord. In terms of solfege syllables, we are simultaneously hearing the pull upward from T to Do, as well as the pull downward from Fa to Mi. And taken all together, those two dissonant intervals and these tendencies to move by half step create the strong sensation of tension and release that we experience through hearing this progression. When it comes to labeling dominant seventh chords with chord symbols, it couldn't be simpler. As always, we use the root pitch of the harmony to name the chord, and we simply add an Arabic numeral 7 to the symbol to indicate a dominant seventh chord. The Roman numeral analysis is equally straightforward. A dominant seventh chord built on scale degree 5 would be labeled with an uppercase Roman numeral 5 and again an Arabic numeral 7 to indicate its dominant seventh chord quality. We can also invert seventh chords, much in the same way that we've inverted triads in the previous episodes. Only this time, we'll have a total of 4 possible positions owing to the fact that we have 4 pitches in play. Beginning from root position, I only need to transpose the lowest note up by an octave to reach the next inversion. And I can do this a total of 3 times before ending back up at root position. As before, we define the inversion by the lowest sounding pitch within each harmony. In first inversion, the third of the chord is the lowest. In second inversion, the fifth of the chord is lowest. And in third inversion, the seventh of the chord is the lowest. When it comes to labeling these inversions, the chord symbols follow the same practice as they did before with triads. We need only add a slash followed by the new lowest sounding pitch to indicate an inverted seventh chord. Labeling the inversions with Roman numerals is also similar to before, but we'll need new figured bass symbols for these seventh chords. As we learned just a moment ago, the root position dominant seventh chord is indicated by an uppercase Roman numeral accompanied by a small Arabic numeral 7, derived from the interval of a seventh formed between the lowest and highest notes. In first inversion, we swap out that 7 with a 6-5, owing to the intervals of a sixth and a fifth now formed between the lowest and highest two notes. In second inversion, the Roman numeral is now followed instead by a 4-3. And lastly, in third inversion, that Roman numeral is followed by a 4-2. Now, as you can imagine, remembering these Roman numerals and the figured bass symbols that go along with each inversion calls for a little old-fashioned memorization. But if you happen to forget them, you can probably work your way back to the correct symbol by looking at the intervals formed between the lowest note and the upper three. They also present a layer of difficulty because inverted triads and inverted seventh chords use different figured bass modifiers to their Roman numerals. Whereas the chord symbols up top, they can more or less use identical slash chords. That's a fine place for us to take a break today, so feel free to hit pause on the next screen to go stretch your legs, drink some water, and eat a few orange slices. When you're ready, we've got more knowledge for you after the break. Now that we have a good understanding of dominant seventh chords, as well as their functional tendency to progress back to tonic, I want to show you something that I think is pretty neat. Let's pull up our old friend for this, the cadential progression, minor 2, major 5, major 1. It's shown here in D major, and once again, it's in SATB format. We're going to make a few tweaks here and there to inject a little more tension into the progression. But first, let's just hear it as it is to orient our ears. Now, not surprisingly, the very first thing I'm going to do today is change that 5 chord to a 5-7 chord by moving the alto voice down a whole step. Now, rather than simply doubling the root pitch of our harmony as it was before, I've assigned the 7th of the dominant chord to the alto voice. We've already studied the impact that this has on our dominant to tonic progression in the first half of today's video. So let's just take a listen to the progression now that we've changed it up a little bit. To take things a step further, it's actually the predominant harmony, that little E minor triad at the beginning, that I want to manipulate now. The goal, once again, is to create even more tension within the progression. So what if, rather than a minor triad, I substitute in a full-blown dominant 7th chord instead, but one that's still built upon the root pitch of E natural? Well, for starters, I've got to inject a little bit of chromaticism to accomplish this. An E dominant 7th chord is spelled with E natural, G sharp, B natural, and D natural, and that G sharp isn't diatonic to our D major key signature. So already, we know we're leaving the realm of diatonic chords here. Before we go any further with any analysis, let's pause once again to hear this progression played out loud now that we've got this chromatic harmony involved. To my ears, that's quite a different sound from where we first started. Now, let's dig in with a little bit of harmonic analysis and explore what's going on under the hood here. Using all we know about Roman numeral analysis to date, we set about labeling this newly chromatic predominant chord. It's built upon scale degree 2, and as a dominant 7th chord, we're going to apply an uppercase Roman numeral followed by an Arabic numeral 7. On its face, there's nothing wrong about this, but ultimately, it obscures the function this chord is now playing. This isn't just chromaticism for the sake of embellishment or ornamentation. This harmony is actually functioning as the dominant of the dominant. It's almost like Inception for dominant 7th chords, and as silly as that might sound, it's not a bad way to consider this concept. You see, what we're observing here is known as a secondary dominant. And it's also part of a broader branch of harmony called borrowed chords. You see, when we hear this E dominant 7th chord, it momentarily tonicizes the key of A major. But we don't actually perceive a full-blown key change to A major. We don't hear a modulation, because the instant we hear the following A dominant 7th chord, we're pointed right back to D major, which is subsequently confirmed with the resolution to the D major triad. Instead, we're in effect borrowing that E dominant 7th chord from the key of A major, just for a moment, to intensify the harmonic motion within our progression. And it works because the tonic of our borrowed key and the root of the chord we're heading towards are both the same pitch. In this case, A. So back to the problem with our Roman numeral. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it, strictly speaking, but I want to better represent its function within the progression. Since it is quite literally the dominant 7th chord of the dominant scale degree, I'm going to represent it instead with a 5/7/5, commonly referred to as a 5 of 5 chord. Now, the first thing to make clear with this new notation is that the slash symbol here is operating in a distinctly different way than it does in chord symbols. In a chord symbol, a slash is meant to indicate the chord quality and the lowest sounding note, so we use it for inversions. But in Roman numeral analysis, a slash actually indicates the chord function and the borrowed key. In our D major example, that E dominant 7th chord functions as a dominant chord, and it is borrowed from the key of A major, which is the dominant chord in our home key. Thus, the dominant 7th of the dominant, or 5/7 of 5. Woo! Dominance of dominance. Is your mind blown yet? No? Okay, maybe not, but this might do it. Not only can we use a secondary dominant to lead us to the dominant of our prevailing key, we can also use it to lead us to just about any other chord within the key. That's pretty cool. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here's another progression that we've encountered previously, arranged once again in SATB format. In its unaltered diatonic state, it goes major 1 to minor 6 to minor 2, major 5, and back to major 1. Let's have a listen. Now, I'm going to work in a secondary dominant chord once again, but this time I'm going to apply it over that connection from minor 6 to minor 2, a different spot than before. Our target harmony here is built upon E natural, so we're going to temporarily borrow the dominant 7th chord from the key of E major, which is a B dominant 7th chord. In our original progression, the chord that precedes the E minor triad is a B minor triad. So we don't have to make all that many adjustments to create a B dominant 7th chord instead. We merely move one voice to cover the 7th of the new chord, and we also alter another voice up from D to D sharp with the simple addition of an accidental. The result is now a secondary dominant chord borrowed from the key of E, or scale degree 2 in our prevailing key signature of D major. Thus, we write the Roman numeral out as 5/7 of 2. And with that, we can more clearly see its dominant function leading to the minor 2 triad chord. To close out this part of the video, let's hear this progression once again, now that it includes a secondary dominant in an unexpected location. To wrap up today's episode, we're going to dial it back a bit to triads. We've already explored the way that a dominant triad creates tension, primarily owing to the fact that it includes the leading tone, which has a really strong tendency to pull upwards towards the tonic. There are other ways, however, to introduce tension in our harmonies that don't rely on the leading tone. Suspended chords are chords that substitute either the 2nd or the 4th in place of the 3rd in a triad. And these have a strong tendency to resolve by moving that suspended note back to the 3rd. Suspended chords are labeled with either sus2 or sus4, depending on which note is substituted for the 3rd. And suspensions can be applied to major or minor chords with equal treatment. Here, we can see these suspensions in notation. Using an F major triad as our starting point, we can replace the A natural with G natural to create an F sus2 chord. Or we can replace the A natural with a B flat to create an F sus4 chord. Let's hear these chords played in succession so we can compare their sonic characters. It's pretty easy to feel the slight twist that's added with each suspended chord, as well as the relaxation that comes with each resolution. The tension here is caused by the dissonant interval of a major 2nd, which is formed between the root and 2nd in the sus2 chord, and then again between the 4th and the 5th in the sus4 chord. If you've ever listened to The Life I've Never Led from Sister Act, you've heard this in action. The entire opening is this steady rocking between D major triads and D sus2 or D sus4 chords, and it creates this subtle push and pull in the music that simultaneously evokes the amen cadence. Speaking of amen, that's the end of today's episode.
Amen!
Let's just quickly recap the ground that we covered today. Things started off with an introduction to seventh chords, the next frontier for our exploration of Western tonal harmony. We studied how to generally invert and label seventh chords, and specifically, we honed in on the dominant seventh chord. After the break, we took dominant seventh chords out for a spin, and we learned how we can borrow them from other keys to create secondary dominants, which lent new momentum and interesting colors to our harmonic progressions. And we wrapped things up with a look at suspended chords, a novel yet simple way to inject a little bit of tension into our triads. Next week, we make like Anakin and turn to the dark side. We're leaving the major keys behind and introducing minor keys and scales. So until next time, be kind to each other, and thanks for watching.